Good morning, everybody. Thought I'd follow up that little banjo building introductory we did a minute ago with let's talk about wood. You know, that's one of the main things that it's about, and that's one of the trickier things to get the hang of is like what kind of wood you're going to need to build your banjo and where you're going to get it. My first banjo that I built when I was 16 years old with my dad, out of the Foxfire 3 book, we used pine. I'm pretty sure it was just straight white pine from a hardware store. And that is not the ideal wood to use to build an instrument at all. It's porous, weak, doesn't sound good, very muted tone, etc. A lot of the cheap instruments back in the day, maybe still today, are made using a lot of pine. It's not a great wood for building musical instruments. So as one general rule you're gonna know is if your musical instruments are generally hardwood is what you want to use. You don't want to use pine being a soft wood. Copper, go on, scoot, honey, get it. You want to use a hardwood. The most popular wood for banjos that you're going to see, and probably for like violins as well, is maple. That's what most banjos that you see today or that have been made in the last 100 years or so, factory-made banjos, are made out of maple. And here's try to show you all a nice piece of maple here. This is what they call ambrosia maple. You can see the hole and the stain left by the ambrosia beetle that some people like. But this is a good piece of old quality maple wood. And so this is a nice chunk that I'll be using for tuning pegs. So it's suitable for, for the neck of the banjo, the tuning pegs, the bridge, the tailpiece. You could make the nut out of this. I generally will use animal bone for the nut, so that won't be wood, but you could use wood. So maple is one you could use for that. That's what most banjos are made out of, especially the neck. Like my Wayman that I play, that's definitely all maple. And my Luscombe too, that's maybe a walnut neck, but usually they're maple. Anyhow, walnut, we just talked about that. My favorite wood of all probably, and especially for making banjo necks and stuff, is walnut. Here's a nice big piece of local North Georgia walnut that I got from a guy. Maybe you can see some of that nice grain there, but this is the end piece from something that I'll get a couple necks out of a piece that was yay big probably. So walnut is great. It's not as hard and like rigid as maple, but it's definitely plenty dense. It's great to work with. It's a great all-around banjo wood. I would like to make a banjo completely out of walnut, but I usually don't. We'll get to that. Another great wood that is great for instrument making is cherry. Here's a nice piece of cherry. You see how maybe you guys can see that it's awfully red, and this is a side scrap piece. I never really got any necks out of this, but I get lots of tail pieces and tuning pegs and bridges. I do a lot of my bridges and tail pieces out of this kind of cherry. I got this from an old friend of mine who pulled this up out of a riverbed somewhere up in Michigan, I guess. So I guess it's a native like black cherry, but it's like wormy cherry. It's got the wormholes in it and stuff. But so it's good. This is a good suitable wood. A lot of banjos, especially the old mountain banjos, are made out of cherry and walnut. And not necessarily maple. Poplar is something we talked about in the other video. This is a nice piece of poplar here, a board that I'm going to use. And reading about the old like mountain banjo makers in the Foxfire books, and maybe in some of the Library of Congress books, or some of that literature that's been put out over the years, seems like a good majority of those mountain banjos are made out of poplar, and I think that's probably just because it was, and even today, it's a pretty widely available and cheaper and easy to work with hardwood. It's light, And it's suitable for instruments. It's not the best sounding wood, but it's easy to work with, it's cheap, and it is a hardwood. Let's see, I've also got here a piece of, oh, excuse me, guy. Got a red oak board here. My personal favorite, see, this is the boards that I'll use for the hoop of a mountain banjo. My personal favorite wood to use on the hoop of the mountain banjos, which, as we talked about in the last video, really just consists of, you cut out 3 concentric rings out of your board and stack them, and that makes your banjo hoop that holds the head and everything in there. My favorite wood to use for the banjo hoop, the pot, the body, is red oak right here. So this is widely available too. I mean, here in Georgia we have tons of red oak. I have it growing right outside my door. It falls over every winter. We cut it up. We burn it in our wood stove. But red oak it turns out to be one of the best pieces of wood for the bodies of musical instruments. I think some of the finer guitars and maybe violins are made out of have a red oak top or body. So my favorite is when I build a banjo, a mountain banjo, I like to make it out of red oak. Red oak has the great quality of it's a hardwood, but it's not a dense hardwood. And not only is it's not just porous and airy, it's strong, it's real fibrous. So the fibers in this board run all the way from here, plumb all the way up back here. So I could take my mouth and put it on the end of this board and blow air into it. And no shit, y'all, there's some of my air is traveling all the way down and blowing out the other end of this board. So air will travel all the way down that board. So what that means for the instrument builder, the hobby banjo enthusiast, is that this is a great wood for the pot of the banjo. It's a great sounding wood and it's strong. It also means that it's not a great wood for the neck of the banjo. The neck of the banjo, you want to use walnut, cherry, maple. You could use poplar, but you could use red oak. I've made a red oak banjo neck before, and it worked. It's fine, but it's not ideal because it's so porous and stuff. It's not ideal for your neck. Like a neck, I like to use a denser wood that doesn't have any air in it. Because of in my view, because of the carving on the neck around the peg head and the peg holes, you want those to be, you want your friction tuning pegs to be anchored in a dense, solid hardwood, like a walnut, a cherry, a maple, or a poplar, something like that. Red oak you can use, but it's not ideal. Use the red oak for the pot of your banjo. For your neck, use your walnut, your cherry, your maple. Same thing goes for tuning pegs. The tuning pegs need to be a strong, dense wood with not a lot of air pockets in it and not a lot of like fibrous material in the wood. That's why, you know, most of your violins those tuning pegs are all made of ebony, or they're rosewood. That's another dense wood. Ebony, of course, is super dense. So my hillbilly version of ebony is black walnut or cherry. You know, this cherry is hard and dense. It's damn near like ebony. And black walnut and maple will pass for a tuning peg too. And when it comes to bridges and tailpieces, I usually like to use the same kind of wood that I would use on a tuning peg. So I like to use cherry on a lot of my bridges and tailpieces and stuff. But you could make a great bridge out of a piece of red oak and stuff. It's because of that fiber and stuff. It's gonna chip around where your string notches are. So you don't want to mess with. You could, but that's why people they'll put an ebony strip on top of the bridge where the strings meet, because there's so much movement there and stuff. It'll chip like a red oak or even a maple, just bare maple. So that's why I usually make my bridges out of cherry or black walnut, dense, less fibrous kind of wood. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good rundown, guys. I'd like to hear your questions, your thoughts, your comments, any other ideas you want to hear from me about. And I know some of you guys are woodworkers and luthiers yourselves. Jump in the comments, correct me, educate me, tell me some stuff. Let's get the talking going on banjo building. Yeah. Oh, you know, one more thing before I leave you guys. An important. Where did I put that CD? Dadgummit. Well, never mind. Stay tuned. We're going to talk about one of my favorite banjo players and banjo builders, a guy named Rick Ward. He lives up around Boone, North Carolina. So I had the CD out here earlier in the other video, but I'll do it again. I'll show his CD and we'll talk about Rick. He's an important banjo builder and musician and singer, and a guy that I got to meet a couple times. And we'll talk about him and in the future. So thanks for watching, y'all. I hope you enjoyed, and holler at me in the comments. See ya.